My phone vibrated. It wasn't her. It was a distant relative sending a photo. I opened the image, and my world collapsed. My daughter was at the altar, arm in arm with her father, and I wasn't there. At that moment, I felt my heart being ripped out of my chest. I, who raised her alone, who dreamed of every detail of that day. I was excluded as if I were nothing more than a stranger. And the question that echoes to this day is just one. Why did my own daughter decide to erase me from her story? I always kept that blue dress like someone guarding an ancient secret. It was my mother's hand-sewn, stitch by stitch, with a patience that's almost unheard of today. When I ran my fingers through the fabric, I felt a gentle shiver, as if I could hear her laughter in the kitchen, the radio playing low, the smell of freshly brewed coffee. I promised myself that one day I would dress my daughter in it, as a blessing and a continuation. And, look, I repeated that promise so many times that it became a prayer, a habit, a home. At the back of the closet, the dress waited with me. It waited for fevers, overdue bills, Christmases with simple tables and full hearts. It waited for moves, cardboard boxes with crooked labels, and that damned fear of it not working out, but somehow it always did. On cloudy days, I'd open the closet door just to peek at the blue, and remember that hope has color too. I'd arrange it on the hangers delicately, as if any carelessness could unravel my memory. When my daughter was little, I would sit her on my lap and tell her stories about her grandmother. Your grandmother had fairy hands and a firm hand, girl. She would laugh, pull my ear, and ask if I, too, would one day have fairy hands. No, my daughter, but I have courage. And courage, I confess, was stitching my life together, thread by thread. I imagined our wedding day like someone imagining dawn after a long night. Everything fit together, everything simple, everything ours. As time went on, my daughter grew older, and I began to hide the dress less and reveal its meaning more. This is a piece of our history, I'd say, carefully folding the hem. She'd look, smile, and then rush off, full of commitments, modern things, and urgencies I never learned to measure. I'd stay there, alone in the room, adjusting the silence like someone making a bed. Did she understand? Did anyone understand before their time? There were days when I thought about getting it adjusted, because our bodies change, right? But I decided to wait for the right date, the right conversation, the right hug. On a sleepless night, I'd run my hand over the lace and remember my mother's voice. Daughter, promises require calm. And calm, sometimes, weighs heavily. It weighed on me like a wet blanket. Even so, I held on, because a mother holds on, even if it's with her teeth. It's curious how certain hidden things begin to speak to themselves. The dress spoke to me. It spoke of respect, of presence, of ritual. I would respond softly, I'll be there. I repeated it to myself like a mantra, like someone training their heart not to stumble on the important day. And if doubt ever arose, because doubt always does, I would sweep the house, light some cheap incense, and ask permission from my dead. Take care of us, okay? I vividly remember the smell of bar soap when I washed the blue one for the first time, just to see how it reacted to water. It didn't fade, the stubborn thing. It became even more vibrant, like heaven after rain. I hung it on the clothesline with old clothespins, and there came a wind that made me dizzy with memory. I leaned on the windowsill and promised again. It's going to be beautiful, Mom. I swear it's going to be beautiful. Who was I trying to convince? Myself? Time? One afternoon I decided to try the dress on over my clothes, just to check the fit. The mirror showed me a woman I recognized and didn't recognize at the same time. Wrinkles, yes. Fatigue, plenty, but also a dignity I wouldn't buy in any store. I felt a lump in my throat. This isn't just fabric, it's history, I whispered. And in that whisper, I hid an old fear. What if history, without a witness, becomes just silence? My daughter came home that day and didn't even notice the dress stretched out on the chair. I'm in a hurry, Mom, she said, grabbing a glass of water, her eyes already on her phone, her body already out in the street. I smiled and feigned custom, as if the rush were a polite visit. Inside, a part of me begged her to stay 5 more minutes, just 5, so I could tell her, so I could show her, so I could say, "Look, it's yours." But I kept quiet. Mothers sometimes keep quiet so as not to disturb the little peace they have. That night, I folded the dress with a care I can't explain, and, before putting it away, I pressed my face against the fabric. It smelled of closet and memory, a blend only time can create. "Can you hold on a little longer?" I asked, like someone conversing with a devout saint, and I answered, "Yes, we can." Then I closed the closet door slowly, holding my breath, like someone closing a secret. And it was there, in that closing of the door, that I realized the blue dress wasn't just a promise, it was proof. Proof of what I was, of what I tried to be, of what I dreamed for us both. A proof waiting for the day to be presented, the witness of my love in the form of fabric. What I didn't know, and how painful it was to discover later, is that some proofs arrive late and some loves, even immense ones, can be left outside the party. But that part one still didn't have the courage to face. The first signs were small, almost invisible, like dust you only notice when the sun shines through the window. We called every week. Suddenly, it became, "I'll text you later, Mom." And the later was never a specific time. I tried not to make a fuss, telling myself that youth is a rush, that those who love are also late. Even so, when the call went to voicemail, my heart sank with it. And look, nothing weighs more heavily than a phone call that never happened. The visits, once filled with laughter and the smell of cake, began to dwindle. "It's a busy weekend, Mom, I'm swamped." I'd reply, "Sure, honey, take care of your things," and hang up, chewing on the silence. It was as if the house grew bigger, and I, smaller within it. I'd arrange flowers in the vase, not out of vanity, but to bring color where there was only waiting. And, as night fell, the waiting gained echo. I tried to be practical. I made a simple calendar, marking the days she called, the days she showed up. The foolishness of a mother who needs to see with a pen what her heart already knew without ink. The markings became thinner. The paper turned white, as if time had forgotten our agreement. With each page turned, a twinge of guilt curled inside me. Had I said too much? Had I demanded too little? There was one lunch that hurt me in a different way. She sat at the table, picked at her food with her fork, and stared at her phone, as if something urgent was about to happen far away from me. I asked about work, friends, the neighbor's dog, anything that would keep us in the same place for 5 minutes. I received short, succinct answers, as if someone wanted to leave without seeming like they wanted to. And I, who'd always had a way with words, felt illiterate in the face of her silence. I began to notice the small absences, the cup she no longer used, the guest room pillow that remained exactly as I'd left it, the folded towel that hadn't seen the sun. Silly things, I know, but an old heart learns to read small details. The house gave clues that I was losing a habit, the habit of her presence. And I, stubborn, rubbed furniture polish on the furniture no one touched, as if shine were a cure for neglect. The messages changed tone. Before, "Mom, look at this dress. Does it suit me?" Then, "Busy, I'll call you." I tried sending photos of the garden, the sky, the cake that had risen beautifully. I received frugal emojis, sometimes none at all. And I found myself replaying the conversation as if searching for a crooked phrase, a mistake of mine. My finger would pause on the screen, hesitating to ask, "When's the date again?" But I swallowed, afraid of seeming intrusive in the life I'd helped build. One day, I picked up the phone to schedule a surprise visit, a hug without an appointment. I stopped in my tracks, purse in hand and my body slightly bent over, like someone frozen in a photograph. What if she didn't like it? What if I got in the way? Look how far I've come. asking permission to love my own daughter. I sat on the edge of the bed, breathed slowly, and decided to send a "I miss you so much." I waited for the three dots to type. They came, disappeared, came again, and nothing. The excuses became professional. Meetings, traffic, tiredness. No energy today, Mom. I'd say, "Rest, my dear," and hang my will on the coat rack in the bedroom, along with your coats left here years ago. The will, poor thing, crumples but doesn't give up. Sometimes I'd press my ear against the hallway wall, as if I could hear its life on the other side, some laughter, a sound that assured me there was still a place for me in history. On more difficult nights, I'd say to your grandmother in my mind, "Mom, give me a sign. Tell me how to avoid suffocating with love without it seeming like a demand." This balance is difficult, you know? We want to get it right, but the relationship scale shifts as children grow. And just when I'd almost gotten it right, someone would come and take it away. I, who'd always been one to adjust the hem of a dress, found myself unable to adjust the distance of affection. The worst part was realizing that distancing is gentle. It doesn't slam doors, it doesn't shout, it doesn't make a fuss. It just goes and takes with it the routine, the silly questions, the little notes on the fridge. Before I knew it, I was already tiptoeing around my own house, as if any noise could scare away what little was left. And, even without saying anything, I felt something big was about to happen, the kind that changes the map. But who teaches the heart to read omens without panicking? I always knew that, sooner or later, the wedding date would come up. There was no escaping it. But every time I tried to make conversation, it was like stepping into a minefield. Once, between a cup of coffee and a piece of bread, I casually asked, "So, honey, have you chosen the date?" She looked away, checked her phone, and replied curtly, "We haven't decided yet, Mom." It was quick, cold, almost rehearsed. And I, foolishly, accepted that answer like someone accepting crumbs, even though I knew it wouldn't hold up. Days later, I took another chance. We were walking through the square, and I thought the light wind might soften her heart. "So, any news about the big day?" She gave a wry smile and murmured, "When everything's ready, I'll let you know." That "I'll let you know" rang in my ears like a nail. It was too short a sentence for too big a subject. But I swallowed it because mothers swallow to avoid pushing things further away. But deep inside, something whispered, "She already knows, she just doesn't want to tell you." With each attempt, the same evasion. I asked gently, changing my tone, searching for openings. Nothing. It was as if there were an invisible wall between us, made of unspoken words and fleeting glances. The lack of an answer said more than any explanation. I returned home feeling like I was carrying a heavy suitcase full of ownerless questions. Questions that kept me company even in the wee hours, when I tossed and turned in bed, unable to find rest. The cruelest thing was that it wasn't just about a date. It was about trust, about sharing, about the right to be present. I, who had been through every fever, every stumble, every fear, now had to beg for an invitation. I, who had sung "Happy Birthday" to a cake and clapped at a school graduation, was now treated like a stranger. Didn't she notice? Or did she notice all too well? These questions burned inside me, like unquenchable embers. I tried to rationalize. She must be busy, confused, afraid of displeasing someone. But deep down I knew better. Her voice carried a distance that couldn't be explained with excuses. It was as if I'd made a silent decision, and I just didn't have the courage to face it. I told myself, "Don't force it, just wait." But waiting hurt more than any confrontation. Waiting was like living with a knife to my throat without ever cutting. One day I dreamed about the scene. I arrived at the church, wearing a blue dress, and everyone looked at me disapprovingly, as if I were an intruder. I woke up sweaty, my heart racing. I got up, went to the closet, and touched the dress as if to apologize. "I don't know if anyone will wear you, Mother," I murmured. That dream felt like a warning, a premonition of an absence I didn't want to acknowledge. Because, deep down, I already knew the invitation would never arrive. I started to watch myself. Am I talking too much? Am I demanding things without understanding? I began to measure my words, rehearsing dialogue in front of the mirror, as if I were an actress in a play that would never premiere. I told myself, speak calmly, speak softly. But when the time came, she already had her answer ready, sharp. We haven't decided yet. And so, once again, the door closed in my face. I smiled on the outside, but inside I was nothing but rubble. Her silence became routine. I began memorizing the sentences that would come, like someone memorizing a script from a bad soap opera. I'm busy, Mom. I'll let you know. We'll see you later. With each repetition, I felt the distance grow wider. It was like watching a tape rewind. The more it looped, the further away I got from the beginning. And I, helpless, just watched. Because a mother doesn't give up, but she doesn't force it either. And this balance is slow torture. I was once sitting on the porch with a neighbor, and she said, "Do you know the date of your daughter's wedding yet?" My heart raced, my mouth went dry, and I lied. No, but it should be soon. She tells me everything. The lie came easily, but it burned like alcohol on an open wound. I smiled to hide it, but inside I cried. And when I was alone, I really cried, because I realized I had no answers, not for others, not for myself. And so I sank into questions that echoed in my chest without answer. When? Why? And me? Each unspoken word was a stone in my pocket, pulling me down. I wanted to believe it was just a misunderstanding, a delay, a mix-up. But the truth, the one we feel even without proof, was already haunting me. My daughter had chosen to hide the most important day of her life from me. And I just didn't know how to survive when that day arrived. It was a Sunday like any other. The sun timidly filtered through the living room curtains, and I prepared breakfast with the calm of someone trying to fill the silence with small gestures. I spread butter on the bread, put water on to boil, and for a moment I almost forgot the weight of the last few weeks. I was there, in the kitchen, surrounded by familiar smells, when my cell phone vibrated on the table. A simple ringtone, a random notification, but it opened a chasm within me that was impossible to close. I grabbed the phone absent-mindedly, thinking it was an advertisement or maybe a good morning message from my neighbor. But the name that appeared on the screen wasn't ordinary. It belonged to a distant relative, someone who rarely wrote to me. "What a beautiful bride," the message said. I couldn't understand. I opened the attached image, and in that instant, time stood still. My daughter was at the altar. White dress, delicate veil, wide smile. And I wasn't there. My body froze. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped my phone. I felt the ground drop away, as if someone had pulled the rug out from under me. No, it's not possible. It can't be today, I repeated aloud, trying to convince myself it was a mistake. But the flowers, the bouquet, the emotional look. Nothing in the photo left room for doubt. It was real. It was the wedding. And I had been left out. I ran to the window, as if outside I might find some answer, some sign that would refute the scene. But the street remained calm, Sunday remained the same, and only inside me did everything feel like ruins. I glanced at the clock on the wall, 10 a.m. I imagined the bells ringing in another city, the applause, the voices celebrating. Meanwhile, I held a mug of cold coffee, alone, an unwelcome spectator of my own daughter's happiness. The photo was still open on the screen, and I couldn't take my eyes off it. Beside her, arm in arm, was her father, my ex-husband, with the same smile as always, satisfied, victorious, as if he'd finally achieved what he wanted, a place that was no longer mine. I touched the screen with a trembling finger, tracing my daughter's face. I felt a pang so deep I had to lean on the table to keep from falling. "Why, my daughter? Why?" I whispered, but the phone didn't answer. The image seemed to mock me. Everyone dressed up, everyone celebrating, everyone smiling except me. I, who had dreamed of that day since I first held her in my arms, could now only watch through a photo sent by chance. Life is cruel, I thought. Cruel because it didn't even give me the right to choose to suffer there, face to face in person. They took away even the chance of presence, condemning me to the exile of stolen memory. I took the photo, enlarged it, and took in every detail. The white lace dress, the bouquet of pale roses, the sparkle in her eyes. I should have been there, holding her hand, adjusting her veil, offering one last piece of advice. But no, she had chosen her father to fill that place. He was the one who led, the one who smiled, the one who received everyone's gaze. I, who had endured fevers, tears, and sleepless nights, was cast aside as if I were disposable. It hurts to write this, but that's how I felt. Discarded. At that moment, I didn't have the strength to cry. It was a cry that wouldn't come out, stuck in my throat like a stone. I walked aimlessly around the house, phone in hand, staring at the screen like someone staring at a sentence. My heart was beating wildly, as if it wanted to escape my chest. I thought about calling immediately, but my hands wouldn't respond. I thought about screaming, but my voice wouldn't come out. I could only repeat, like a painful mantra, "You didn't call me. You didn't call me." I let the coffee cool, let the morning pass, let life pierce me like a knife without a handle. Every minute was a reminder that I had been excluded from the dream I had longed for. I sat on the couch, dressed in silence like someone in mourning, and stood there, staring at the photo. Sunday, a day of celebration for many, became my day of burial. Because, somehow, I felt as if a part of me had been buried along with that absence. And while the world outside continued its rhythm, birds singing, children playing, neighbors washing cars, I remained motionless, the photo illuminating my pain. There was no music in my house, no joy in my body. Only one certainty pierced me. The most important day of my daughter's life had happened, and I had no place in it. And that certainty, my God, how it hurt. When I saw the photo, I lost my footing, but it was only when I realized no one was answering my phone that true despair set in. I called nonstop, one number after another, and each call went to voicemail like a hammer to my heart. My hands were sweating, my heartbeat quickened, and I felt a strange dizziness, as if I'd climbed many stairs without breathing. I screamed her name, calling out to the girl who once fit entirely in my lap, and the silence responded cruelly. I wrote dozens of messages in a row, each more distressed than the last. "Where are you? Why didn't you call me? Is everything okay?" I sent her photos of her as a child, silly photos of her hair all tangled up, and an old video of us laughing in the kitchen. Nothing. The three dots that appear when someone is typing appeared once, twice, and then disappeared like hope fading. I waited for a reply that never came, and the phone became a stone I couldn't put down. I tried calling friends, relatives, anyone who could tell me if this was a mistake. "It was just a private lunch, Mom." I heard a distant voice, trying to reassure me. But I wasn't there. I replied, and the voice on the other end became too soft, like someone unwilling to step into a minefield. I felt anger, a hot anger that rose from my stomach to my throat, and also shame, because that same anger reminded me of things I had done, of ill-chosen words in that past that now seemed to demand my presence. The hours passed, as if someone had turned off the clock. Sunday was becoming meaningless. I walked around the house like an automaton, opening cabinets, stirring dishes, trying to feign busyness so I wouldn't fall to the floor crying. In the kitchen, the smell of the coffee I'd made earlier had already faded, and everything else was just an echo. I wandered around the house with the photo on my phone, as if a talisman could give me back what had been taken from me. But it didn't give me back anything. It just reminded me. That afternoon, I sat on the couch and cried. I cried soundlessly at first, then with a lump in my throat, then with sobbing that seemed tentative and resolved nothing. I remembered every sleepless night I spent caring for her, the fevers, the tantrums, the school tests, the mended clothes. I thought about how many times I deprived myself of things to ensure she had more. And then the pain took over. How could I explain that all this investment of love was returned with silence? I went to the window and watched the street, seeing people coming and going, lives going on with their celebrations and sorrows, and I felt emptied of belonging. There was a sound of laughter outside that seemed insulting to me. I leaned my head against the glass, felt the vibration of the cars, and wished with all my being to open the door and go find the ceremony, to enter no matter what, to shout my right as a mother. But something inside me told me not to make a scene, and I obeyed, because I've always been one to maintain dignity, even when everything inside is breaking. Late that afternoon, I grabbed a pen and paper and tried to write a letter. My handwriting trembled. The sentences were harsh, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find a tone that sounded neither accusatory nor submissive. I wrote, "My love for you is greater than my hurt," and crossed it out. I wrote, "I need an explanation," and crossed it out. The letter sat in the middle of the table, waving indecision like a white flag. I didn't send it. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of pride, maybe because I didn't want her to see how much I was falling apart. That same day, my neighbor knocked on my door with a cake she'd baked to cheer me up. I took the plate with trembling hands and forced a smile. Outwardly, I thanked her softly. Inwardly, I asked if she would have preferred it if I had been called. The neighbor looked away. Sometimes I realized people are in a hurry to avoid getting involved in other people's stories. And I, in the middle of it all, was just the thing that bothered her. When night fell, I lit a candle and sat at the table to dine alone. Eating is an exercise in presence for those who live alone, and I chewed slowly, trying not to think that at another table there was laughter and song. I picked up the blue dress and felt the fabric, warmth and remembrance. I placed it beside the chair, as if that gesture were a sign that I still existed in her story. And, as the candle flames flickered, I made a small request. If she returns, may it be for truth and not for an empty return. Before going to sleep, I reviewed the messages once more. A mixture of anger, longing, and guilt kept me from resting. I thought about how many things I'd said wrong in the past, how many disproportionate scoldings, how many times I'd traded affection for pride's sake. And then a thought crossed my mind. What if, after all this, all I had left was to rebuild? But that question remained unanswered, and that heavy feeling lingered. The despair wasn't just about the lost day, it was about the deep wound that might not heal anytime soon. 2 days later, the phone finally rang. When I saw her name on the screen, my heart raced as if it were about to leap out of my chest. I answered at the first vibration, my voice choked with haste. "Daughter, where are you? What happened? Why didn't you call me?" On the other end, silence. A dense, cutting silence that seemed to cut through the wire like a razor. Then, after a pause that seemed infinite, she answered in a low, almost whispered voice. "Mom, I didn't want any fights. I didn't want any trouble. It was better this way." That sentence echoed inside me like thunder. Better? How could it be better to exclude one's own mother from a wedding? I took a deep breath, trying to find words that wouldn't come laden with tears, but I couldn't hold them back. Better for whom, my daughter? Better for you? Better for your father? Because for me, it was like dying alive. The line went dead, without a single sigh of comfort. Only the distant sound of someone breathing calmly, while I burned with anguish. I begged. You could have told me, you could have explained. I would have understood. I would have stayed quiet in a corner, just to see you happy. But the response was icy. I didn't want a heavy atmosphere, Mom. I wanted peace. I felt my legs tremble. Peace. She used that word as an excuse to erase me, as if my presence were war, as if I were an unbearable weight. Peace for her meant silence for me. And that silence was the sentence of someone who had no right to witness her own daughter's happiness. My voice cracked, and I tried, through sobs, to ask questions that were never answered. Did you think of me when you walked down the aisle? Did you think of me when you chose your bouquet? Did you think of me when you said, "I do," in front of the priest? She remained silent, and that silence said more than any answer. No, she hadn't. Or if she had, she'd swept the thought under the rug, like someone sweeping away inconvenient dust. At that moment, I realized the call wasn't an apology. It was just a cold statement, a way to close the story. She said, "It's over now. I want you to accept it. Accept it." Those words fell on me like a stone. I, who had accepted all of life's pain to give her some comfort, now had to accept being excluded, as if it were a deserved punishment. I bit my lip to keep from screaming, but my chest screamed inside. "I am your mother." I try to summon my memory. "Remember, daughter, when you fell off your bike and scraped your knee? I spent the night by your side. Remember the stories I made up to put you to sleep? Remember the times I skipped dinner so you could have food on your plate?" My voice trembled, but she replied dryly, "Mom, I don't want to talk about the past. I just want to move forward." And so, with a few words, she erased years of dedication, as if they were just dispensable chapters in a book not worth rereading. The coldness of that conversation wasn't just in the words, but in the tone. There was no emotion, no warmth, not even a hint of hidden affection. It was like talking to an icy wall, erected to keep me out. I listened and couldn't believe it. "My daughter, you're talking to me as if I were a stranger." But she didn't respond. The silence, once again, was the harshest response I'd ever received. When the call ended, I stared at the phone in my hand, as if I could still extract an explanation from it. My tears flowed uncontrollably, and the weight on my chest was almost physical, as if someone had pushed a boulder against me. I wanted to smash the phone into 1,000 pieces, but I knew it was the only thread that still connected me to her. So I kept it carefully, like one would guard a relic, even if it were poisoned. That night, I couldn't sleep. I relived every word, every pause, every silence. I heard the phrase, "It was better this way," repeated like a broken record, corroding my insides. I thought about calling her back, sending more messages, asking for another chance. But something inside me told me she'd already made up her mind. I wasn't part of her new life. And this realization consumed me like a slow fire, burning inside without burning out. The coldness of the call lingered within me. It was as if I had lost not only a daughter, but a part of myself. I walked through the empty house, looking at the portraits on the wall, touching each frame as if touching wounds. And, in each smiling face, I asked, "Where did I lose you?" But there was no answer, only the echo of her silence, which now seemed to live within me. After that cold call, I thought nothing could hurt me anymore. But I was wrong. A few days later, my daughter called me again. Her voice was hesitant, different, as if carrying a weight that had been held for years. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm, and asked, "Why did you do this to me, daughter? What really happened?" Then came the sentence that pierced my chest like a knife. "Mom, I never forgot your fights with Dad. In my marriage, I didn't want to choose sides." At that moment, the ground crumbled again. Fights? Yes, we'd had many. I don't deny it. But was that all she'd kept? Had all the hugs, the nights of care, the sacrifices faded away in the face of ancient screams? My memory raced like a fast-paced movie. Broken dishes, slammed doors, hidden tears. I had struggled with a failed marriage, an absent man, the pain of raising a child alone. And now my daughter was telling me that this struggle was the reason she hadn't walked down the aisle. She continued, her voice breaking. "Mom, I remember the nights you yelled, the times you spoke ill of him in front of me. I was just a girl, but that stayed with me. I felt like someone had knocked the wind out of me. I wanted to retort, to tell her that everything I did was out of love, that I only wanted to protect her from a man who had hurt me more than once. But the words wouldn't come. I remained speechless, listening to the judgment coming from the mouth of the daughter I had tried to save. The cruelest part was when she added, "I didn't want to spend my wedding day reliving those memories. I didn't want you on one side and him on the other. I preferred not having you there." I trembled from head to toe. "Would you rather not have your mother?" I thought, but couldn't say it out loud. It was as if she had chosen to amputate a part of herself to avoid old scars. But the cut now was in me, and it was bleeding. I tried to argue. "Daughter, you don't understand. Your father was also to blame. He walked away. He couldn't handle it. I bore it all alone." But she quickly countered, almost as if she'd rehearsed it. "He told me something else. He said he walked away because you were difficult, because he didn't want to seek help, because he let his ego get the better of him." Those words hit me like punches. So that was it? So she believed his version? So I wasn't just absent from the wedding. I was to blame. My eyes filled with tears, and my voice cracked. "Do you really think I didn't try? That I didn't do everything? I made mistakes, yes, but I made mistakes trying to get it right." She didn't answer. Her silence hurt me more than any accusation. It was a heavy silence, laden with judgment. I felt that in that moment, the entire narrative of my life was being rewritten, and I was being portrayed as the villain. My own daughter's villain. I spent the night awake, replaying every detail of the past. I remembered the day her father packed his bags and left without looking back. I remembered how she cried, clinging to my legs, and how I held on tight, saying, "We'll make it." And we did. It wasn't perfect, but we did. Now, hearing from her that my efforts had turned to shadows was like having my soul ripped out. I asked myself, was the love I gave not enough to erase the scars of the fights? Her revelation opened a wound I thought had already healed. I discovered that while I believed I was protecting my daughter, she was harboring bitter memories against me. It was as if I'd lived two versions of the same story, mine of struggle and sacrifice, and hers of trauma and resentment. And between these two versions, she chose to believe his, not mine. It shattered me. At the end of the call, before hanging up, she said, "Mom, I need some time. I need to get away from this pain." And I held the phone, listening to the end of call beep, feeling like the separation was already complete. It was as if she'd placed a tombstone over our relationship and written, "Here lies the mother I didn't want in my marriage." And in that icy silence that filled the house afterward, I understood something. Perhaps a mother's greatest pain isn't being excluded from a moment. Perhaps it's realizing that, for her own child, the love that seemed enormous has been remembered as a burden. After that revelation, I couldn't eat properly for days. The rice would go cold in front of me, and I would just push the grains around with my fork, like someone pretending they still have an appetite. My body was crying out for sustenance, but my soul was on strike. Each sip of water seemed to go down with a scratch, as if my body itself were rejecting life. I wandered around the house like a lost soul, aimless, without purpose, just trying to understand when motherhood became a sentence. The hours dragged by slowly, and the silence consumed me. Sometimes I heard the sound of neighbors laughing, children playing in the street, and that hurt me even more. How dared the world move on, when inside me everything was in mourning? Because, yes, it was mourning. Not the mourning of a coffin, but the living mourning, the kind we bury standing up, with our eyes open, and that allows no goodbye. Losing a child to death is a cruel pain, but losing one to contempt is a pain that does not heal. When people asked about the wedding, I lied. "It was just for a few guests," I'd reply, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. I made excuses, spun quick stories, like someone putting a damper on an open wound. But each time I lied, I tasted the bitter taste of humiliation. I, who had always prided myself on telling the truth, now had to hide behind petty farces to avoid exposing myself to the town's cruel judgment. And the judgment, oh, it arrived anyway. I only had to step out onto the street to feel the slanted glances, hear muffled whispers. Why wasn't she called? These were questions no one asked directly, but they followed me like a shadow. I became the talk of the street corner, gossip disguised as curiosity. And every glance, every whisper, was like another handful of dirt on my chest. I saw myself as a social ghost, present in body, but absent in respect. The nights were even worse. I lay in bed, but sleep wouldn't come. I kept replaying scenes from her childhood, her first shaky step, the first fever that kept me awake all night, the first time she called me Mom in that tiny voice. And I asked myself, where did I go wrong? At what point in life did my love stop being enough? These questions haunted me like shadows in the dark, never bringing answers. And I cried silently, biting the pillow so as not to wake the void. One day, I opened the closet and came face to face with the blue dress. It sat there, still, like the guardian of a broken promise. I touched the fabric and felt a shiver that ran through me like ice. I sat on the floor, the dress in my lap, and cried until I lost track of time. It was a cry that didn't ask for comfort. It just wanted to empty my soul. And there, between sobs, I understood. That dress would never be worn by my daughter. It was a symbol of a broken dream, a reliquary of a blessing that would never be fulfilled. I began to live as if I were in a permanent wake. I woke up feeling unmotivated, walked aimlessly, and spoke without energy. The colors of the house seemed to have faded, as if the entire world had lost its pigment. The coffee no longer had an aroma, the food no longer had a flavor. The mirror reflected nothing but a woman aged by grief. I was, in fact, a living widow, a widow of a relationship that still existed on paper but had died in my heart. My attempts to distract myself were futile. I'd pick up a book, read a page, and forget the previous line. I'd turn on the television, but the sound of soap operas irritated me, seemed to mock my misfortune. Even the birds singing disturbed me, as if reminding me that there was life out there, but not within me. I was nothing but ruin, just the rubble of a motherhood that no longer found room to flourish. It was in this state of grief that I realized the cruelty of emotional abandonment. Unlike death, it doesn't bring flowers, visitors, or condolence hugs. It brings silence, emptiness, and shame. It brings the feeling that you haven't lost someone to the inevitable, but rather that you've been rejected, replaced, erased from history. And this, I discovered, is a burden no mother should bear. The news spread faster than I could have imagined. In that small town, where every corner has eyes and every window is a confessional, my name became a topic of conversation before I could even compose myself. I'd go out to buy bread and feel the stares piercing my skin like sharp blades. No one asked directly, but everyone knew. And deep down, that collective silence hurt more than any open affront. The weight of judgment hung in the air, suffocating. I heard whispers at the market. They say she wasn't invited. But why? What did you do? It was as if each word were a veiled accusation, as if guilt had been stamped on my forehead. I clutched the bag of vegetables tightly, pretending not to hear, but inside my chest was filled with shame and anger. With each step, I seemed to carry not only the groceries but also the burden of a sentence I didn't ask for. Even friendships changed in tone. Conversations that were once full of affection now carried exaggerated caution, like stepping on broken glass. "Are you okay, dear?" they'd ask, with that air of compassion that felt more like pity. I'd respond quickly, smile without showing my teeth, and change the subject. I didn't want to expose myself, but I knew everyone was already aware of my social punishment, being the rejected mother. And that label stuck to my skin like an ink stain that couldn't be removed. One day, a bolder neighbor approached me. They told me your daughter got married, but you weren't there, were you? The question was laced with false innocence, her eyes shining with venomous curiosity. I froze for a second, took a deep breath, and replied, "It was a small ceremony, just for the closest ones." I said it as if swallowing bitterness. Because, after all, if one's own mother isn't considered close, who else would be? But the neighbor didn't object, just smiled, satisfied with the gossip's confirmation. The worst part wasn't what they said, but what I imagined they were saying. Every laugh on the street felt like mockery. Every averted glance felt like an accusation. I became a stranger in my own city, someone whose name was passed around by word of mouth as an example of maternal failure. And when I walked through half-open doors, I was certain my shadow was left behind, carrying comments I would never hear, but which stung as if they were whispered in my ear. At these times, I found myself wondering, why is society so eager to judge the pain of others? Did people feel better seeing me down, commenting on my misfortune? Perhaps it was easier to point the finger at myself than to face the emptiness at home. But knowing this didn't lessen the weight I felt. I carried on my shoulders not only the pain of exclusion, but also the public shame of having been left out of the most anticipated moment of my daughter's life. The church also felt like a courtroom. At Sunday masses, I felt the curious gazes of the faithful, and even the priest's words sounded indirect. "Honor your father and mother," he would say, and I would bow my head, tears streaming discreetly, asking God if my daughter had forgotten this commandment or if I, in fact, didn't deserve any honor at all. It was a dilemma that gnawed at me, victim or culprit. Which label suited me? The nights grew even longer. I closed my eyes and relived scenes from the past, but now mixed with the voices of the city. Each memory was accompanied by an imaginary comment. She wasn't called because she failed. She didn't deserve to be there. She must have done something serious. These echoes haunted me in the darkness, making it impossible to separate my pain from the opinions of others. It was as if my identity were on trial in a public square, with no right to a defense. I began to avoid leaving the house. The market, which had once been my weekly celebration, became a battlefield. The park bench, where I liked to read and watch life go by, became the scene of uncomfortable stares. Even the bakery, with its smell of fresh bread that always cheered me up, now only reminded me of the shame of being seen. I isolated myself, as if the whole world had turned to accuse me. And in this isolation, the pain grew even more intense. But there was something even crueler, realizing that deep down, I was also judging myself. Every voice in the city only amplified my own doubt. Did I fail? Am I really to blame? And this doubt, planted like a poison seed, grew within me. Because it's not enough to be rejected by your daughter. When the whole world begins to confirm this rejection, we begin to believe that perhaps, in fact, we don't deserve to be a mother. One morning, when the house seemed even quieter than usual, I felt a strange urge to open the closet. It was as if an invisible voice was calling me to that forgotten corner. I opened the door slowly, and there in the back lay the blue dress. It was folded inside the box where I kept it, wrapped in tissue paper yellowed with age. My fingers trembled as I touched the fabric. It felt like I was handling not cloth, but living, pulsing memories, full of broken promises. I carefully picked up the dress and laid it on the bed. The blue still shone, even after so many years, as if it carried a power of its own. I ran my hand over the lace, remembering the day my mother sewed it. "This dress will carry stories, daughter," she said. I never imagined it would end like this, not at the altar, but in a lonely bed, cradled in tears. I felt a pang in my chest, as if the fabric bore witness to my defeat. I sat next to the dress and began to cry. It was a different kind of crying, not just of sadness, but of farewell. I understood, for the first time, that dream was gone. There would be no photos of her wearing the blue dress underneath the white dress, no knowing smile between us on the big day. There was only me and the silence, me and the memory, me and the cold fabric against my tired skin. And this emptiness was unbearable. I cried until I had no more strength, until my body felt as heavy as stone. I remembered the day I bought the box to store it. I chose the prettiest one, with delicate flowers on the lid, imagining it would be opened with celebration, laughter, and emotion. But there I was, alone, opening it like someone opening a coffin. The box, which had once symbolized hope, now felt like a funeral urn for a dead dream. I closed my eyes and silently asked, "Mom, why did everything happen like this? Where did I go so wrong?" But the answer didn't come. Only emptiness responded. I pulled the dress against my body just to feel its weight. It fell over me with a dignity I no longer recognized in myself. For a moment, I caught sight of myself in the mirror and realized something strange. I didn't look like a rejected mother. I looked like a whole woman, still standing, still breathing, despite everything. This reflection frightened and comforted me at the same time. It was as if the dress wanted to remind me that I still existed, even without the celebrated role of mother. But soon reality returned with a vengeance. The mirror also showed the wrinkles, the eyes red from crying, the posture hunched over with pain. It was a reflection too honest to ignore. I stood there, stripped of illusions, wearing only the memory of unrequited love. I sighed deeply, hugged the dress to my chest, and let a few more tears fall. It was impossible to stem the tide when everything inside me screamed for answers that would never come. I put the dress away again, folding it with the same care as always, but this time with a different feeling. It was no longer an object of hope, but of mourning. Closing the box felt like closing a cycle, even if against my will. I felt like I was burying not just a dream, but a part of myself, the part one believed would be celebrated as a mother on the most important day of my daughter's life. I held the box in my lap for a few minutes, caressing the lid as if caressing a beloved face. I realized that, somehow, the dress hadn't been saved for her, but for me, to remind me of who I was, what I dreamed of, what I lost. And perhaps, who knows, to teach me that some promises aren't made to be kept, but to show us how far we can resist pain. I put the box back in the closet, but now I knew it wasn't just a storage item. It was a symbol that love, no matter how deep, doesn't guarantee a place in the heart of the one we love. And that's one of the most bitter lessons life can offer. I closed the door carefully, like someone closing a prayer. But inside me, nothing closed. On the contrary, the wound only seemed to open wider. That day, I understood that the blue dress was never just fabric. It was memory, it was legacy, it was hope. But above all, it was pain. And I would have to carry that weight alone, in silence, like someone keeping a secret impossible to share. A few days after I put the dress back in the box, life played another cruel trick on me. I was walking downtown, head down, trying to avoid curious glances, when I heard a familiar voice. I looked up, and there he was, my daughter's father, my ex-husband, in a well-pressed suit, a proud smile plastered on his face. For a second, I considered crossing the street, running away like someone fleeing their own past. But our eyes met, and there was no escape. He approached with that victorious air he always carried, as if the world were a stage for his arrogance. "It was a beautiful ceremony," he said, without preamble. Those words fell on me like a blow. Beautiful for him, beautiful for everyone except for me, who had been erased from history. I remained silent, trying to maintain my composure, but inside I was only revolt. He noticed my silence and ironically added, "You weren't missed." It was as if he'd plunged a knife into my chest and twisted it. I felt my blood boil in my veins. I swallowed the urge to scream in the middle of the street, but my hands were shaking. Wasn't I missed? I thought. Who spent sleepless nights caring for the sick girl? Who struggled to pay for school, food, and clothing? who held the fort when he, like a coward, decided to walk away. But the word stuck. His pride paralyzed me, as always. It was as if he still held power over me, even after so many years away. I took a deep breath and managed a short sentence. I wasn't missed by you, but by her, I always was. He laughed. He laughed mockingly, like someone who knows they've won. And that laughter echoed in my ears for the rest of the day. It was as if he'd stripped me of every last shred of dignity I had left. Anger burned, but with it came a bitter taste of helplessness. After all, he was right about one thing: I wasn't there. And now the whole town knew it. As he spoke, I realized how kind time had been to him. He stood erect, confident, with an air of conquest. As for me, I felt worn, wrinkled with grief, diminished by exclusion. It was as if fate had chosen sides, and mine was always the heaviest. He spoke a few more platitudes about the wedding, the party, how radiant his daughter was. Each word was like salt rubbed into an open wound. I simply listened, powerless to react. When he finally said goodbye with a cold wave, I stood in the middle of the street, unsure whether to walk or collapse. Cars passed, people went about their lives, and I stood there, motionless, trying to process the venom he'd poured into me. I looked around and felt people's eyes burning into my back. Had they heard? Were they laughing at me inside? My heart sank, and I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. In that moment, I realized it wasn't just my daughter who had rejected me. It was as if there were an alliance against me, silent but devastating. He had been by her side. He had taken the place that should have been mine, and now he was determined to rub it in my face. I, who had carried so much, now found myself reduced to nothing. I felt surrounded, as if all ties had been severed, and I was just the uncomfortable shadow of a story that had gone on without me. I shuffled home, my mind filled with voices. I repeated every word he said in my mind, as if they were hammered into my head. You weren't missed. That phrase stuck with me like an invisible tattoo. I sat on the couch and cried until the tears dried. It wasn't just pain, it was humiliation. The humiliation of being diminished before my own daughter, of seeing my life reduced to footnotes in someone else's book. That night, I dreamed of the past. I dreamed of the first time he looked at me, of the promise of family he never kept. I dreamed of the separation, of the hastily packed suitcase, of the door slamming. And in the dream, I heard the same phrase repeated. You weren't missed. I woke up sweaty, with my heart racing, and I understood that that encounter would not be forgotten. It was another scar, more proof that life sometimes can be too cruel. And so I remained silent, ruminating over what had happened. I realized that somehow that encounter was more than a provocation. It was a warning that the pain would come not only from my daughter's absence, but also from the persistent presence of a past that had never given me peace. And I knew deep down that this was just another chapter in my living grief. The worst was yet to come. The nights after that encounter grew even longer. I'd lie in bed, and the silence of the house seemed to scream inside me. The living room clock marked each minute with a cruel tick, as if mocking my insomnia. I'd close my eyes, and instead of rest, memories would come flooding back. My daughter's first step, the loose laughter running through the backyard, the Sunday mornings when she'd wake me up asking for pancakes. Everything came back with a painful clarity, as if time had made a point of rubbing in my face what I no longer had. Loneliness wasn't an absence of noise, it was an excess of it. Because inside my head, there were voices that wouldn't stop. Voices from the city talking about me. Voices from the past, remembering the fights, the mistakes, the moments I'd failed. Her voices repeating, "It was better this way." And, amidst them all, a crueler voice, my own, asking relentlessly, where did I go wrong? Was my love not enough? It was an internal tribunal, and I was always the condemned one. I tried to occupy my mind. I washed the dishes slowly, mopped the floor, tidied the drawers. But it all seemed futile. Every object in the house was a memory. The deep plate reminded me of family dinners. The sofa reminded me of afternoons when she'd lie with her head in my lap. Even the tablecloth seemed to bear the invisible marks of conversations that would never return. I walked between whispering walls, and none of those whispers brought peace. At times I even spoke to myself. I asked aloud, "Why did you erase me from your life? Why didn't you let me be there, even in silence?" The empty house returned only an echo. This echo, at times, drove me mad. It was as if the loneliness were too noisy, as if it filled every corner, leaving me no room to breathe. I longed for true silence, but all I found was a multitude of memories screaming inside me. There were nights when I wandered aimlessly from room to room. I'd stop at the door to her room, which still had something stored away. I'd look at the made bed, the old books, the papers scribbled with teenage dreams. Everything was untouched, like a museum of a childhood that would never return. She touched the objects reverently, as if they were sacred relics, and there alone, she allowed the tears to flow freely. Because, in that space, I felt her presence mixed with absence. The pain came in waves. Sometimes it was anger. Anger at her, at my father, at life, at myself. Other times, it was pure, aching, irremediable longing. I felt my body grow heavy, my heart grow weary, and I asked myself, how long can a mother live in this state of abandonment? There was no answer. There was only the feeling that time had become an enemy, stretching too slowly, too cruelly, prolonging the suffering until it became unbearable. People I passed would ask, "Are you okay?" I'd mechanically reply, "Yes, I am." But the truth was, I was falling apart inside. The loneliness was so intense that even the noises from the street became unbearable. The neighbor's barking dog seemed to mock my pain. The radio next door, playing upbeat music, was like a knife. Every sound was a reminder that life went on for others, but not for me. It was on one of those nights that I realized something cruel. Her absence wasn't just at the wedding. It was also in the future. Because if she'd taken me away from the most important day, what was to stop her from taking me away from all the others? The thought pierced me like a lightning bolt. I imagined birthdays, graduations, parties, even children she might have, and me, always on the sidelines. The prospect of being an absent mother, not by choice, but by rejection, was more painful than any death. I lay down again, my chest tight, and closed my eyes. But sleep didn't come. Only the feeling that I was trapped in a labyrinth with no way out. The solitude was too loud for me to rest. And I understood, deep down, that this would be my fate for a time, to live accompanied only by the voices of my memory. A living, noisy grief that wouldn't let me forget, even for a second, what I'd lost. And so I spent another night, waiting for a dawn that brought no relief. It only brought another day of the same, where loneliness screamed inside me, and I tried to pretend I could still bear it. But deep down, each day was just further proof that I was alone, and that my daughter's silence had the power to be the most deafening sound in the world. Amidst this whirlwind of loneliness, it was a longtime friend who knocked on my door. She was one of those old companions who know our pain just by looking into our eyes. When she saw me, she didn't even need to ask anything. She just hugged me. I, who had been holding back for days, collapsed in her arms, crying like a child. We sat at the kitchen table, and she, in a voice both firm and sweet, said, "You need to get up. You can't let this pain destroy you." I remained silent, fiddling with my coffee cup without drinking. How could I get up if the weight of rejection kept me rooted to the spot? She took my hand and squeezed tightly, as if trying to restore life through touch. "I know it hurts. I know it feels like the end. But it's not. You can't let her decision define who you are." Those words sank into me like a bitter balm. They stung, but held the promise of some remedy. My friend spoke with conviction. Your daughter may have erased you from the wedding, but she can't erase your story. You're her mother, and no one can take that away. I wanted to believe her, but the pain still screamed too loudly. I replied weakly, and what's the point of being a mother if, at the moment that mattered most, I was left out? She sighed deeply, wiped my tears with the back of her hand, and replied, It's pointless because being a mother isn't just about being at the altar. It's about being there on all the other days that pave the way to get there. In that moment, I realized that friendship is a kind of miracle. It doesn't mend the pain, but it lights a lit candle in the darkness. My friend reminded me, with her steady presence, that I wasn't just a rejected woman. I was someone who had weathered worse storms and remained standing. You need to take care of yourself, she said, because if she ever comes back regretting it, she'll need to find a strong mother, not a broken one. Those words hit me like a wake-up call. I began to reflect on this in the days that followed. Perhaps I was giving in too quickly to grief. Perhaps I was letting her absence define me completely. I'd look in the mirror and see only flaws, but my friend kept saying, You did your best. And that's enough. Was it really enough? Or was it just comfort? I kept having this doubt, but I realized that, even so, there was a seed of hope there. On another visit, she brought flowers. The house needs color, she said, placing the vase right in the center of the table. The fresh scent spread throughout the room, breaking the heavy air that had accumulated. I smiled, for the first time in days, even if it was a small, shy smile. See, she said, it's still possible to bloom. And in that moment, I felt like maybe there was a chance to breathe without suffocating. Her friendship didn't erase my daughter's absence, but it reminded me that I wasn't completely alone. It was a net that held me when I was falling apart. Sometimes she spoke little, just listening. Other times, she talked a lot, like someone insisting on filling the empty spaces in the house. Each time, she offered me a slice of normalcy, something I had lost. And that, in itself, was salvation. Even so, when night fell and I was alone again, my friend's words echoed loudly. Get up. But how could I get up when the ground seemed to have swallowed my feet? I would repeat that question like a refrain. But as much as it hurt, it wasn't the same desperate question. It was a question that held a possibility. Maybe, just maybe, I could still get back up. Her advice wasn't an immediate remedy. It didn't heal my grief. It didn't restore my lost place. But it planted a spark within me, the memory that, despite everything, I was still alive, and while there's life, there's a path. And if my daughter were to ever knock on my door, she would need to find a mother who hadn't faded. A mother who, even wounded, learned to rise. One of those early mornings when sleep completely abandoned me, I sat at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper before me. The silence in the house was so heavy I could hear the sound of the pen scratching against the paper. I decided to write a letter to my daughter. Not just any letter, but a complete confession, a desperate attempt to stitch together with words what had been torn apart by silence. I began trembling, unsure of where, but soon the sentences poured out, like a dammed river finding a crack. My daughter, why did you exclude me? What did I do that was so unforgivable? I wrote, tears smearing the ink. Each word was a scream, a cry for help disguised in calligraphy. I wrote about the nights I stayed awake caring for her, about the sacrifices I made so she would never want for anything, about how every decision I made, even the wrong ones, was always intended with love. I wanted to remind her that behind every failure was a woman struggling to be a mother without a manual, without support, without rest. The letter filled with memories. I told her about her first birthday cake, made with sponge cake, but with colorful candles that she blew out with laughter. I told her about the time I sold my heirloom ring to pay for her college education because I believed in her dreams more than mine. I Even told her about little childhood stories when she would run around the yard barefoot and say she wanted to be a princess. And I always said, "You already are, my daughter. You always have been." Each painful memory turned into a line, and the paper became a mirror of my heart. But along with the memories came unanswered questions. What did I do to make you see me as an enemy? Why did you believe his version more than mine? Where did I stop being enough? I wrote and cried, feeling like that paper was the only one that still listened to me without judgment. The pen ran as if I were in a hurry to relieve myself, but the pain only grew. It was like screaming in a cave and hearing only the echo back. At one point, I stopped and reread what I had written. The text was tear-stained, the lines blurred, as if even the paper had refused to bear so much suffering. I held the page to my chest and felt that this was more than a letter. It was a confession I could never say aloud. Because when we are in front of those we love, words shrink, afraid of hurting, afraid of not being understood. But on paper, they were free and cruel. I also wrote about the future. I dreamed of standing beside you at the altar. I dreamed of holding your children in my arms. I dreamed of growing old being remembered as a present mother. But you ripped me from those dreams like someone ripping a page from a book. It was hard to write that, but it was true. I felt like my future had been stolen along with that wedding. And there was no pretending to be normal after that. When I finished, I folded the letter carefully, like someone guarding a treasure. I placed it inside an envelope and wrote her name on the front. For a moment, I considered sending it. I imagined the mailman delivering it. I imagined her opening it. I imagined the tears falling from her eyes. But along with the fantasy came fear. Fear that she would read it and judge me even more. Fear that my words, instead of bridges, would become new weapons against me. I put the envelope in a desk drawer. I opened it again a few times in the following days, held it in my hands, even contemplated a walk to the post office. But I always backed out. Maybe, deep down, I knew she wasn't ready to hear it yet. Maybe it was I who wasn't ready for another rejection. So I left the letter there, a secret between me and the paper. A secret that, ironically, held more truth than any real dialogue. To this day, the letter remains in that drawer, yellowed with age, but intact. Every now and then, I reread it. Each time, it hurts as if it were the first. But it also reminds me that, even without a voice, I am still capable of loving. Because writing, even without sending, was my way of continuing to say, I never stopped being your mother. One morning, I woke up earlier than usual and found myself in the bedroom mirror. I stood there, staring at the woman staring back at me. Her face was tired, her dark circles were deep, her lines were marked by time. But it wasn't just the wrinkles that bothered me, it was the invisible weight of guilt I carried in my eyes. I looked at myself and immediately thought, was it all my fault? Have I failed as a mother more than I can admit? The mirror became a courtroom. Every line on my face seemed to bear witness to an old mistake. I remembered the times when, exhausted, I lost my temper and yelled more than I should have. I remembered the arguments with her father, the harsh words spoken in front of a child who wasn't obligated to listen. I remembered the times when money was tight and I couldn't give her what she asked for, even trying my best. The mirror was unforgiving. It reflected every flaw like a living scar. I pressed my hands against the frame and felt the tears well up. Was I truly a good mother, or have I just been fooling myself this whole time? I asked the reflection. The image didn't answer, but it returned the look of a devastated woman. The silence in the room heightened the weight of the question. I wanted to hear her voice telling me that, yes, I was enough. But all I had was my own voice, torn between defense and accusation. As I stared, I remembered something painful. How many times had she told me, as a child, that I was her strength? How many times had she hugged me and called me her hero? How had that image shattered over time? Had I let the respect and love she once had for me slip through my fingers? The mirror seemed to laugh at my fragility. I didn't just see an aging mother. I saw a woman marked by regret. I sat on the edge of the bed and continued to stare at the mirror, as if trying to wring answers from it. My thoughts were a whirlwind. What if I had sought help? What if I had spoken less negatively about her father? What if I had been more patient, sweeter, more understanding? The weight of the what-ifs crushed me. It was as if the mirror reflected not just my face, but all the paths I hadn't taken, all the choices I hadn't made. And each absence became an accusation. I closed my eyes and, for a moment, tried to remember the times I'd gotten it right. The hugs we'd given, the nights spent awake, the stories we'd made up to calm her fears. But when I opened my eyes again, the mirror seemed to erase those memories, showing only the mistakes. And it was in that moment that I realized how cruel the way we look at ourselves can be. Because sometimes we don't need others to judge us. We condemn ourselves alone. I ran my hand over my face and whispered, "I did what I could." But the words sounded weak, almost a lie. The mirror gave me a disbelieving look, as if to say, "Really?" And I burst into tears. I cried with anger at myself, with pity for the woman I saw reflected in my reflection. It was as if there were two of me, the mother who fought with all her might and the woman who failed irreparably. And between the two, I didn't know which was the truth. The morning sun began to stream through the window, illuminating the glass. I saw my wrinkles in detail, and for a moment I felt each line was a map of my life. Some made of love, others made of pain. But overall, it was a human, real face. And despite the guilt, there was also a shred of dignity there. A fragile, almost invisible dignity, but one that still held. Because even when I failed, I never stopped loving. And maybe, just maybe, that had some value. I turned away from the mirror, but its image stayed with me the rest of the day. It was like carrying a portrait etched in my memory. And every time I closed my eyes, I heard the same question echoing. Is love enough when mistakes speak so loudly? I had no answer, but I knew that until I found it, that mirror would be my greatest enemy. After so many days immersed in grief, one morning something changed. It wasn't a miracle, nor a grand revelation. It was small, almost imperceptible. A ray of sunlight pierced the curtain and fell onto the bed, illuminating the very corner where the blue dress rested inside the box. It felt like a silent call, an invitation to look again at what I'd only seen as a symbol of failure. I took a deep breath, opened the closet, and took out the dress, determined to face what it could still teach me. I pulled the fabric against my body, not caring if it still fit or not. I slipped it on over my nightgown, adjusted the shoulder straps, and looked at myself in the mirror. The image that appeared wasn't of the rejected mother, nor of the woman aged by pain. It was different. A woman standing, still alive, still whole despite the blows. I felt a shiver run down my spine. For the first time in a long time, I saw dignity in my reflection. It wasn't just fabric over skin. It was armor over a wound. I walked around the room in the blue dress, my bare feet on the cold floor, and each step felt like a ritual. The fabric swayed gently, as if cradling my soul. I didn't cry, I didn't smile. I just felt. It was a strange feeling of belonging to myself. I realized that that dress, saved for years for a moment that never happened, still had value. Not as an inheritance for my daughter, but as a reminder of the woman I am, a woman who never gave up. I sat in the armchair with the dress and closed my eyes. I remembered my mother, the times she would say, "Daughter, life can take a lot from you, but never the right to rise." And there, that morning, I felt like I was rising from an invisible grave. I wasn't bringing my daughter back. I wasn't healing the rejection. But I was reclaiming something I'd left dormant, the right to continue being myself, even alone. As I remained silent, I realized that the dress wasn't a symbol of defeat, but of resistance. It had endured for decades, stored in boxes, forgotten and remembered, but it was still whole.
Just like me.
Time could wrinkle it, it could stain it, but it couldn't completely destroy it. That was the message it carried. And in that moment, I decided that I wouldn't allow my life to be nothing but living mourning. I still had the right to flourish, even in arid terrain. I got up and, in an unexpected gesture, opened the living room windows. The wind blew in, stirring the blue fabric, and I felt like a breath of life. The house, previously suffocated by silence, became alive. The sound of the street, which had previously hurt me, now seemed like distant music. I breathed deeply, as if relearning how to use my lungs. It was a modest but real rebirth. I wasn't cured, but I was awake. And this awakening was the first step. Still wearing the dress, I walked to the kitchen and made coffee. The aroma, which had seemed dead for days, comforted me again. I placed a cup on the table, sat up straight, and thought, I still have a life. That simple phrase resonated strongly, because until then, I had believed my existence had ended on my wedding day. But then I realized it wasn't. I was still breathing, I could still decide, I could still rise again. Exclusion wasn't a death sentence. I spent the rest of the day wearing the blue dress, as if summoning courage. When night fell, I slowly removed it and folded it carefully. But this time, I didn't put it in the box. I placed it on the chair, in plain sight, as a daily reminder that I wasn't just pain. I was also resilience, memory, strength. As I lay down, I felt a different kind of tiredness, not of despair, but of relief. It was as if, finally, my body had found a reason to rest. And, before closing my eyes, a certainty struck me. Even without her recognition, I was still a mother. Even without a place at the altar, I was still a woman. Even with all the wounds, I was still worthy. And this continuing was my rebirth. The following days were different. The pain was still there, throbbing like a wound that doesn't heal overnight, but there was also a discreet, almost shy serenity emerging within me. I began to realize that, despite its absence, I still harbored hope, silent but firm. A hope that didn't scream, that didn't demand, just waited patiently, like a seed resting in the darkness of the earth until it finds the right moment to sprout. Sometimes, while tidying the house, I'd catch myself imagining the sound of the key turning in the lock and her voice calling, "Mom, I'm here." I knew it was a daydream, but I allowed myself to dream. They weren't dreams of perfect reconciliation. They weren't fairy tales. They were just simple images. The two of us drinking coffee together, her telling me about her life, me listening without pressure. That was enough to warm my heart, even if only for a brief moment. When I went to the grocery store, I sometimes bought something she liked, even though I knew she wouldn't come get it. I put it away in the cupboard, as if that invisible gesture were a way of keeping the bond alive. It was my way of saying, your place next to me is still reserved. I didn't tell anyone about it, not wanting to seem ridiculous or naive. But in the silence of my home, these small rituals were the thread that kept me going. On the coldest nights, I would sit by the window and gaze at the stars. I would say softly, "One day, daughter, you will understand. And when you do, perhaps you will return." I didn't know if I was speaking to God, the universe, or the memory of her. But I did. It was my way of not letting hope die. Because if even faith were to fade, I would have nothing left but emptiness. And I had already learned that emptiness is the worst of companions. There was, of course, fear. Fear that this hope would turn into an eternal illusion. Fear of waiting for something that would never come. But even this fear reminded me that I still had something alive inside me, the desire for reconciliation. And as long as there was desire, I wasn't completely dead inside. Perhaps that was what separated me from absolute despair. Despair destroys, hope sustains, even if silently. I began to talk to her in my mind. During the day's chores, I would sometimes say to myself, "Look, daughter, I'm washing the towel you liked, remember it?" Or, "I made the cake you always asked for as a child." I knew it was idle chatter, but I didn't care. It was my way of keeping her presence with me, albeit invisibly. It was as if each word I spoke to was a bridge, still fragile, but standing. The blue dress remained on the chair, in plain sight. No longer a reminder of pain, but a symbol of resilience and promise. Every time I saw it, I felt a thread still connecting past and future. I didn't know if my daughter would ever wear it, or if she would return to rescue it from the box. But somehow, that dress told me that nothing is completely lost as long as memory exists. And memory, that was the one thing no one could take away from me. I started taking better care of myself, even if discreetly. I fixed my hair, put on a light lipstick, and put on perfume before bed. It wasn't vanity. It was a gesture of self-respect, as if to say, I'm still here. I still deserve to exist with dignity. And in each simple gesture, hope mingled, that if she ever returned, she would find me standing, not fallen. This thought sustained me silently. Over time, I realized that hope wasn't a scream, nor a clamor. It was, in fact, a constant whisper. A whisper that said, hold on. Life can still surprise you. And, even without proof, I chose to believe that whisper. Because, deep down, the mother in me doesn't know how to give up. And maybe, just maybe, the daughter in her doesn't know how to shut down forever either. Time passed, and with it I learned to live with absence like someone living with a scar. It doesn't disappear, but it stops bleeding every day. I still wake up sometimes with a heavy heart, remembering the Sunday photo, the cold call, the dress in the box. But I also wake up with something new, a bitter yet necessary acceptance. I understood that there's no point in fighting what I can't change. And even if the wound doesn't heal, I can learn to walk with it. Today I know that my life will not be remembered for the party I was excluded from, but for the silent battles I fought and won. I know that the love I gave cannot be measured by the recognition I receive. I know that motherhood doesn't end the day a daughter turns her back. It continues, even when it hurts, because a mother never stops being a mother. And this is the truth I carry. I was, am, and always will be her mother, even if she loudly denies it. Sometimes I imagine what it will be like when life demands her return. When she becomes a mother and experiences the surrender, the fear, the sacrifice. Maybe on that day she'll understand, maybe not. But I no longer place my peace in that maybe. I've discovered that hope needs to be mine, not hers. If she returns, I'll be here. If she doesn't, I'll still be here. I no longer live only in waiting. I also live in the present, even if it hurts. I carry with me the image of the blue dress, not as a broken promise, but as a symbol of dignity. Because, even when rejected, I didn't let them tear me away from who I am. I wore it within myself, and in it I found the strength to rise. It became a silent witness to my resistance. And whenever I see it, I remember, I may have been erased from the altar, but I wasn't erased from myself. And so I continue, with the phrase that will never abandon me. I wasn't invited to my daughter's wedding, but I will never stop being her mother. This is the ultimate truth, a hard, cruel, but also unbreakable truth. Because, in the end, being a mother is carrying in your heart a flame that not even contempt can extinguish. Looking back, I understand. Some pain doesn't disappear, but transforms us. I wasn't invited to my own daughter's wedding, but I'm still her mother, and that's something no one can erase. The blue dress, the unsent letter, the silence of the nights, all of this has become a part of me. And I wonder, how many of you have also been rejected by someone you loved? How many have felt the pain of being left out, even after giving your all? Maybe your story isn't the same as mine, but I know the wound of abandonment is universal. What I've learned is simple and, at the same time, painful. No matter how much we're erased from someone's life, the love we give never ceases to exist. It lives on, throbbing, reminding us that we are stronger than we think. And if my daughter ever returns, she'll find a mother standing here, wounded, yes, but not destroyed. Because true love doesn't give up, even when it's not recognized. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced something similar? Have you ever felt the pain of being forgotten by the people who mattered most? Leave a comment and share your story with me. And don't forget, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories. Because no one emerges unscathed from a life truly lived.